Your full-time clinician sees 18 sessions a week. They show up, clients like them, they're good at their work. But the role is quietly costing you money. Not because your clinician is bad at their job, but because 18 was a number that somebody picked once, probably before you had a profit and loss worth reading, and nobody's checked it since. Most practice owners set their full-time caseload minimum the same way, by feel, by what the last practice they worked at did, or by what felt fair to ask their therapist to do. So, how many sessions should a therapist see per week? There's a real answer, and it's specific to your practice. It comes from your pay model, your collection rate, and what each clinician costs you when you count everything. So, we're going to walk through how to find that number and really why that number exists in the first place. So, a caseload minimum isn't about pressure, it's not about getting it right the first time. It's about really knowing where your line is. So, let's talk about what a line is. Every clinician in your practice has a session count where the role starts making money instead of losing it. Below that line, you're subsidizing that clinician's seat with the rest of the practice. Above that line, that clinician is carrying their weight and then some. They're carrying the rest of the practice. The problem is that that line is invisible unless somebody calculates it. So owners end up in one of two places. Either that minimum is set too low and nobody notices that slow leak, or it's set too high with no explanation and the therapists feel pressure and a squeeze and it feels not great. Neither of these options is good. The fix is the same for both of them. Find the actual number, the actual line, and then build the expectation around it. So when people ask how many sessions should a therapist do or see per week, they're usually asking about break even, and that's the wrong target. You have one line, which is break even. That's the point where the clinician's revenue covers their pay, payroll taxes, benefits, and their share of overhead. Nothing is left over after this. You're just literally covering the costs. Line 2, the second line, is your profitability threshold. That's the point where your clinician clears the margin you actually need from that role. We coach practices towards 20% or more clinician profitability because that's what's actually going to fund your admin, your rent, your own pay, and a profit account. That's not just a rounding error left over after everything else. So you want to set your minimum. If you do set your minimum at line 1, every clinician is technically fine and break even, but the practice is running with no cash flow left over. If you set your line at line 2, that profitability threshold, that's where the numbers actually work. So let's talk through an actual example with some numbers to give you kind of an idea of what this all looks like. And this is the type of modeling that we do with clients. These figures are made up for this, so use your own numbers, but the structure should work with your numbers or with my hypothetical numbers here. So let's just do it with a salaried full-time clinician just to make the numbers easy to start off. So let's say we have a salary of $70,000 a year. Our payroll taxes are 9%, which comes out to about $6,300 a year. Say we have some benefits, maybe health, maybe some retirement match. That's about $4,800 a year. And then we have the clinician share of overhead. So that's software, supervision, billing, rent, all that. And that's about $12,000, their share of the total practice's expenses. So if we add all that together, their salary, the benefits, overhead, all that, that's about $93,000 a year. Or if we make it monthly, about $7,760 a month. And that's before they even see a single client. That's just the cost that's there no matter what. Now let's go to look at the revenue side. So let's say they're collecting $120 per session on average. If they do 18 sessions a week, which is about 77 sessions a month, that's $9,290 in revenue per month. If you subtract out their cost, which is that $7,760, you're left with about $1,500 left per month. That's about 16% margin. So that's at 18 sessions a week, 16% margin. If we do 20 sessions a week instead, so that's 86 sessions a month, $10,000 collected per month, with that same cost, $7,760 in cost, you're left with about $2,500. So that's a 24% margin. So at 20 sessions a week, we have a 24% margin, almost 25%, and we have $2,500 left over. At 18 sessions a week, we have 16% margin and $1,500 left over. It's a difference of about $1,000 per month on one clinician, just based on 2 sessions. So 2 sessions a week, this role goes from 20% to, comfortably above it. It's a big change. So here's the kind of so what. That gap is about $1,000 a month or roughly $12,000 a year from one clinician. If you run 6 clinicians, At 2 sessions more per week, you're looking at something in the neighborhood of $74,000 a year, as far as a difference, right? Like if your line is at that mark and you're 2 sessions under that for every clinician, that's a $74,000 difference that you don't have anymore. If you're running 2 sessions above that, that's $74,000 more a year that you now have. That's like a full-time admin, your entire profit margin, a huge pay bump for yourself, a huge office revamp. Like there's a lot that could come from that $74,000. So this is kind of where owners get burned by borrowing somebody else's number that they heard at like a conference or a speaker or a webinar or something like that. The example above that we just shared is a salary model, and salary is a fixed cost. So that clinician costs the same at 14 sessions as at 24 sessions. So every additional session pretty much goes to your bottom line. Volume is so important. The thing is, salary models are not super common in therapy practices, right? But if we have a percentage split, everything works very differently. Because if we're paying a 55% percentage split, that pay cost rises and falls with sessions. Each session contributes maybe $48 after the split in payroll taxes, and the clinician only has to cover their overhead costs before really that role turns profitable. So there's less of a overhead cost hump to get over, right? Because we're not paying that salary, we're kind of paying the payroll cost with each session. So if we run the same kind of 20% profitability target with a 55% split, with $1,500 a month in fixed clinician costs, then our line's more like 15 sessions a week that we need to get to rather than the 20. So you can see salary model versus percentage split, we have completely different lines that we're trying to go for. Same practice, same rate, same target. Your minimum is 20 on salary, 15 on split. The cost structures are nothing alike. So if you've heard somewhere else 20 sessions a month is standard, that number is really only true for a practice that told you about that number, right? You need to model your own. So using somebody else's number is really not going to work. It gives you a benchmark, right? It gives you an idea of like, where should I be with this? But you can't go and take someone else's number as your own. You need to model your own numbers and use your own numbers, because yours and the practices down the street will look very different just based on all those different factors. So how do you do that? How do you find your own numbers? Really 4 steps, okay? 4 steps to find your own numbers. Number 1, you got to try to find your true collected revenue per session. This is not your build rate. It's what you actually collect after payer adjustments and write-offs and all that. If you're insurance heavy, this is going to change by payer, so you might want to use a blended average. Second to that, you want to figure out your clinician's fully loaded monthly costs. So like what's their pay, whether that's salary, split, hourly, payroll taxes, benefits, their share of the overhead, everything. The overhead split is one thing that a lot of people miss, right? As far as like their EHR split, supervision hours, billing and admin support, office space, all that. They need to cover those expenses. So we got to figure out what is that cost. 3, we need to figure out the contribution per session. So really like collected revenue per session minus whatever pay scales. So on a salary, that's the full session value. On a split, it's a session value minus their cut in the payroll tax on it. So like really, what's that difference per session between revenue and their cost? And then you have to solve that for your 20% profit line, right? We're trying to get to 20%. So session count, find where revenue minus the cost equals 20%. That's your minimum. And then you can kind of round it to a clean weekly number. Okay, so we're finding our sessions, finding our revenue, finding our costs, and we're trying to figure out where is that 20%. Now, it may feel like that's a lot of math to do. So linked below this, we have our clinician profitability tool, which is made exactly for this. Open that, make a copy of it, use it for yourself. You can put in the sessions, you can put in the revenue, put in the pay structure, benefits, all that, and it's going to show you the profit margin. So it will do all the math for you. You just need to put in those inputs, and then you're all good to go. One other thing just to think about, if you're trying to run math for the whole year, I wouldn't run it based on 52 weeks. Probably run it on 46 or 48 weeks, just because people are going to take PTO, there's going to be holidays, they're going to get sick. Building a minimum on 52 weeks is not going to work. Nobody's going to work 52 weeks out of the year. All right, after you do this, you can start thinking about bonuses if you want. A bonus really designs itself once you know kind of that profit line. The minimum is the expectation, right? A bonus should start at or above the profit minimum, so above that 20%. Additional sessions are getting rewarded, right, above that minimum. A clinician at 24 sessions is really generating a ton of profit for the practice, so you want to reward them with a bonus. What we want to avoid is a bonus that kicks in below your profitability line. Giving a bonus to somebody that's not meeting the expectation, that's consistently below that, is really just paying extra for a role that hasn't even covered its own costs yet. And that happens more often than you'd think, so be careful about that on that side. Now, you might be thinking, all right, this all makes sense. I can do the math, but like, how do I tell my clinician that I'm moving them from 18 to 20 sessions? That's not easy. That's actually very difficult and not something that's very fun. So a few things to make it land better with your therapist. Frame it as clarity, not as pressure. Most clinicians really want to know what good looks like. What is the expectation? A vague expectation is more stressful than a clear one. So just say, hey, this is just the expectation here for this role. Show your reasoning, not just your number. You don't have to open your books. You don't have to give them the whole profit and loss. Just note that the role is priced around a caseload, and here's the caseload. Okay, this is how our numbers work for us to be sustainable. You can tie it into support. If you're asking them to do 2 more sessions a week, talk about scheduling, referral flow, cancellation policy. Help them figure out how to do that and how to support them in that, to fill them up, to support them as they do more sessions. And make it about the role, not a person. It should be the same standard expectation for everyone that's in that role, not just this person compared to that person. So make it a practice-wide expectation. This is what everyone does here. It's not just something that you need to do. And be honest with yourself about the capacity. If a clinician can't reach their minimum because the referrals aren't there, that's not the clinician's problem. That's a practice problem that you may be kind of putting on the clinician. So think through that on that side. Hopefully this has been helpful. Lots to think about, lots of math to do. As you work through those numbers and find those 2 lines, the break even and then the profit line, feel free to reach out. If you want a second pair of eyes to look at your numbers, happy to look at that therapist profitability tool and go from there.